Happy whatever day it is that you happen to be watching this video. I hope you are having a fabulous day. Professor Butler here, going to do a review of arterial blood gases. All right, so and also known as ABGs. So first thing I'm going to do is, let's talk about a little bit first about ABGs before we start going through building what I like to call the legend that you're going to use as you are going through arterial blood gases. All right. So the first thing is keeping in mind that when you are taking arterial blood gas, it has to come from an artery, not a vein. So obviously you cannot take ABGs from a regular IV. You can take it obviously from any arterial line, for instance, a arterial line as in an art line that a lot of times is in the wrist. You can take ABGs from there, or obviously any other artery in the body. All right, so let's start off with talking about what pH is. And I'm not talking about humans as of yet, just talking about pH that exists out in the world so that we can understand where acidosis is and where alkalosis is in relationship to that. All right, when it comes to the pH scale, does anybody know what the range is from pH? And no, I'm not talking about the 7.35 to 7.45, that is in the human. But when it comes to pH, we got a 0 to 14, okay? So this is the range that anything could potentially fall in when it comes to pH. So right in the dead center is roughly about 7.0, okay? When we are looking with numbers that are on the lower end, are we looking for acidosis or are we looking for alkalosis? I hope you answered. We are looking for acidosis. So those lower numbers is indicative of acidosis, okay? For numbers that are higher, that means that it is alkalotic or basic. We like to call that as alkalosis. Okay, so just starting with this, and as we just said, and I will put up here in just a second, for humans, our pH is between 7.35 and 7.45. So you can see that we are a little bit more alkalotic than we are acidic. All right, start there, okay? Then we're going to take a fabulous trip to Rome. One of the easiest ways, I think, to truly understand how to figure out ABGs, okay? So we are going on a trip to Rome, my friends. And Rome is nothing more than a beautiful acronym that each one of these letters means something. All right, so let's start with R. R stands for respiratory. So that is your R in Rome, okay? Then you can see we've got O. O means opposite. And I will explain what each of these mean as we get farther through it. So respiratory, the R in Rome is for respiratory, the O is for opposite, okay? Your M is for metabolic. So there's your M. And then our E stands for equal. Okay? So we're just going to start with that premise there. Okay? We got respiratory opposite, metabolic is equal. Okay? All right, so we've got that set up so far. All right? Now we're going to talk about, we just talked about acidosis and alkalosis. All right? So let's start with our acidosis, those lower numbers. All right? So when it comes to acidosis, would my pH be high or would it be low? Hopefully you answered it would be low. Okay? And all I'm setting up is a legend for me to use when I start going through. We've got 7 different problems that we're going to work through, so hopefully by the end you will be able to not only figure out what your patient is experiencing, whether it be respiratory, metabolic, acidosis, or alkalosis, but we're also going to talk about their compensation. Okay? Now let's talk about alkalosis. Okay? So when it comes to alkalosis, the pH should be high. Okay? All right, just starting here, we will get to our lab, get to the other values besides pH in just a second. Okay, so acidosis here. So we've already said with acidosis that our pH should be decreased. Okay. Then for our alkalosis, we said that our pH should be increased. All right. So when we are looking at ABGs, there are 3 lab values that we are going to look at. First one we're going to look at is the pH, right? Okay. Anybody know? Well, hopefully you know I just gave it to you. But when it comes to the value for pH in the human body, our range should be 7.35 to 7.45. Okay? Then the next value that we are going to look at is going to be partial pressure of CO2. Okay? So we've got our partial pressure of CO2. Okay? Easiest way to remember this, just drop the 7 and the decimal behind it, and that is exactly your range for partial pressure of CO2, 35 to 45. Okay? Then our last one that we are going to look at, something that helps keep us more basic, is bicarb. Our range for bicarb is 22 to 26. All right, so now we got to throw some of these values over here to our Rome diagram. Okay, so we've got respiratory and we got metabolic. Looking at these 2 values, which one makes more sense in respiratory? Hopefully you answered partial pressure of CO2. Okay, so here's where our opposite comes in. So if I am looking at the partial pressure of CO2, you can see it says opposite. What that means is if my pH is low, my partial pressure of CO2 is just the opposite. It would be increased. Okay? For my alkalosis, again, we're looking at opposite. So if my pH is high, my partial pressure of CO2 should be, hopefully you've all said it to yourself, should be low. All right? Now, the only one we've got left is bicarb. Easiest one to remember. You think bicarb, think body, think of metabolism. So bicarb goes with metabolic. Okay? So we're going to put our bicarb over here. But now, as opposed to being opposite in respiratory, in metabolic, it is equal. So if my pH is low, guess what my bicarb is? It is also low. Alkalosis, if my pH is high, my bicarb is also high. Okay? So again, I'm just creating a legend to use as I start working through my problems. All right. So we've got our values here for the 3 different values of ABGs we're going to look at. We've built our reference for Rome here. The next thing is now we're going to talk about compensation. Okay? So when it comes to compensation, we have 3 different ones. We can have uncompensated, which I like to abbreviate UC. Okay, in uncompensated, pH is off, and one other is off. And I'm going to explain this. Let me just create this first, and then I'll explain what each of these means. Then we've got partially compensated. Nope, not spelling that whole thing out. So we're just going to go with PC. When it comes to partial compensation, all 3 are off. Then when it comes to fully compensated, pH is normal. 2 others are off. And what I mean by off, you're going to start to see as we work through these problems. So when it comes to uncompensated, when I say pH is off, means it will be outside of these normal values, and one other, meaning either the partial pressure of CO2 or bicarb will also be outside of its normal limits. When it comes to partially compensated, all three values will be outside of this range in some way, shape, or form. Fully compensated, our pH will be within the normal range, but both partial pressure of CO2 and bicarb will be off. All right, clear as mud, right? Let's start working some problems. This is where it's going to start clicking and where it's going to make sense, okay? So I'm going to give you some values, and we're going to start drawing arrows, and I'm going to show you how to start solving the problem, okay? So pH, we got partial pressure of CO2, and we have got bicarb. Okay, so just starting with that value here, okay? So I'm going to give you some lab values, and then we are going to work through it. All right, so we're just going to use our reference range right here as we start to go, okay? So my pH, is it high, low, or normal? As you can see, it is low. Oh, let's use a different color. How about it? Okay. So my pH is low. Is my partial pressure CO2 high, low, or normal? In this case, it's completely normal. All right. When it comes to bicarb, is my bicarb high, low, or normal? It is low. Okay. All right, before we get into anything in Rome, let's start with our compensation. So if my pH is off and one of these other values is off, which one of my compensations is happening? pH is off and one other? That looks like uncompensated. So we're going to start with uncompensated. All right. Now, how do we know whether we're going to look at acidosis or alkalosis? This value here. All right. So we are looking at acidosis. Okay. So we are looking at this little bad boy here and this little bad boy right here. And what we're doing is matching to see, do our arrows match? Okay. So in respiratory acidosis, pH would be low and bicarb would be increased. Is that what's happening here? Doesn't look like it. All right. In our metabolic acidosis, our pH is low. Yep, that one matches. Is our bicarb also low? It is. So your patient in this scenario is presenting with uncompensated metabolic acidosis. So far, so good. 1 down, 6 more to go. Okay. My chalkboard's about ready to get really colorful. But you know, those of you who know me well, I like life better in color. All right? All right. Our second one. Our pH, 7.58. Our partial pressure of CO2 is 46. And our bicarb is 32. All right. We're just going to, again, do the same thing we did on the last one. Oh. Sorry, keeping my light off. And a little too bright, okay? All right. So when it comes to our pH, is our pH high, low, or normal? Definitely high, right? pH is way high, okay? Is our partial pressure of CO2 high, low, or normal? That is also high. Is our bicarb high, low, or normal? It's also high. All right, so let's go over to our compensations. Oh, there's only one of them where all 3 values are off. So in this case, partially compensation. Okay, so partially compensated. Now, are we looking at acidosis or are we looking at alkalosis? Well, again, we said as the numbers get higher, we are looking at alkalosis. So we're going to be looking at this little bad boy here and that little bad boy right there. Okay. Now, again, let's go back to matching what is happening. Okay. So in respiratory alkalosis, the pH is high. That is true. And partial pressure CO2 is down. We don't have that. All right, so let's try metabolic alkalosis. Okay, our pH is low. That matches. Is our bicarb high? Yes, it is. So our patient is experiencing partially compensated metabolic alkalosis. So far, so good? All right. All right, next one up. All right, so now we are looking at our pH. Is pH high, low, or normal? We got a normal pH, hot dog. We're gonna eat a chicken dinner. Partial pressure CO2, high, low, or normal? We can see that is, let's give it a red for low. Okay, then we're looking at our bicarb. Is it high, low, or normal? It is also low. All right, so let's start off with our compensation. If my pH is normal and the other two are off, our compensation is fully compensated. All right, so we're going to start with fully compensated. All right, then we got to figure out acidosis or alkalosis. But Professor, your number is right in the middle. How am I supposed to know if I'm to use acidosis or alkalosis? The magic number, ladies and gentlemen, is 7.4. 7.40. Okay? So if it is less than, guess what? It's acidic. If it is greater than, then it is alkalotic. So in this case, we are looking at our acidosis again. All right? That little bad boy, that little bad boy. All right? So we're looking at acidosis. All right? Is our partial pressure of CO2 increased? No, it's not. Is our bicarb decreased? It absolutely is. So your patient is experiencing fully compensated metabolic acidosis. So far, so good. All right. Got 3 down, 4 to go. All right, so looking here, when it comes to pH, is that high, low, or normal? Hopefully you answered with, that is extremely high. Okay. Is our partial pressure of CO2 high, low, or normal? Man, that's low. Is our bicarb high, low, or normal? Our bicarb is normal. All right, so let's start with our compensation. If pH and one of these other two values are off, what is our compensation? We are at uncompensated. Now, are we going to look at acidosis or are we going to look at alkalosis? Again, we have that higher number. We are going to now be looking at alkalosis. Right there and right here. All right, in a respiratory alkalosis, pH is increased, yes. Is our partial pressure of CO2 decreased? It absolutely is. So I'm pretty sure it's respiratory alkalosis, but just for the sake of argument, let's make sure that it doesn't fit metabolic. All right, so pH is also increased. Is our bicarb increased? It is not. So our patient is experiencing uncompensated respiratory alkalosis. Okay. Now I know I can't see or hear any of you, but I guarantee you are geniuses and you are doing this beautiful. All right, so let's get to our next one. All right. All right, so pH, is that high, low, or is that normal? Woo, that is low. We are knocking on acidosis door. Is our partial pressure of CO2, is that high, low, or normal? It's also low. Bicarb, is that high, low, or normal? That is also low. All right, let's start with our compensation, ladies and gentlemen. So if all three values, pH, partial pressure CO2, and bicarb are all three are off, we are partially compensated. Okay? So are we looking at acidosis or are we looking at alkalosis? We are looking at acidosis, my friend. All right, so now let's just match our arrows. Okay? Is our, in respiratory acidosis, pH is down, that is correct. Is the partial pressure of CO2 up? It is not. All right, metabolic acidosis, is our pH is down, is our bicarb down? It is. So our patient is experiencing partially compensated metabolic acidosis. Two more. All right, starting with our pH. Is our pH high, low, or normal? That would be on the high side or alkalotic basic side. Is our partial pressure of CO2 high, low, or normal? It's low. Is our bicarb high, low, or normal? It is also low. All right, let's always start with our compensation. If all three of these values are off, our compensation is partially compensated. Okay? All right, now let's figure out what the patient is actually experiencing. Okay? So are we going to look at acidosis or are we going to look at alkalosis? Definitely alkalosis. Okay? Look at those right there. All right. So looking at respiratory alkalosis, we know our pH is increased. Is our partial pressure of CO2 decreased? It is. So I'm pretty sure it's respiratory alkalosis, but just let's verify that it's not metabolic. Okay? Our alkalosis is increased. Is our bicarb increased? It is not. So your patient's experiencing partially compensated respiratory alkalosis. All right, we got one more. All right. pH, high, low, or normal? It's normal. Partial pressure of CO2, is that high, low, or normal? That is definitely low. Bicarb, high, low, or normal? That is also very low. All right, we're going to start with our compensation. All right, so we've got our pH that is normal, but the other two values are off. Which one of our compensations does that fall under? That falls under our fully compensated pH normal. The two other values are off. So we are fully compensated. All right. Are we looking, okay, but we're in the normal range, but are we on the more acidic side or the more basic or alkalotic side? 7.37, that is less than 7.40. So we are again going to look at the acidotic side. Okay. So we're looking at acidosis here. Okay. All right, so let's see what matches. With respiratory acidosis, our partial pressure of CO2 is increased. Is that happening? No, it is not. In metabolic acidosis, pH is low, and our bicarb is decreased. Is that happening? It absolutely is. So your patient is experiencing fully compensated metabolic acidosis. When I post this information, I will also give you some extra practice questions so that you can get the experience of creating your own. And if you notice, all I did was use this as a legend, right? So create the Rome and knowing how to use this, making your arrows appropriate. Make sure that you know the values of your partial pressures of CO2, bicarb, and pH. And then make sure that you understand each of these compensations, right? That if it is uncompensated, your pH in one of these other two values is off. If it is partially compensated, all three will be outside of that normal range. And if the pH is normal and the two others are off, that's where we get our fully compensated. 7.4 is our breaking point to decide if we are going to look at acidosis or alkalosis. Hopefully that this gave you a good review of ABGs that you can practice and become the best future nurses to care for your clients. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.